A paralyzed millionaire signs a contract without reading, losing his 23BD company until a 7-year-old orphan girl reveals something even bigger, leaving everyone in silence. But what was it? Before we tell this moving tale of sadness and solitude, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more touching stories. The explosion came without warning. One moment, 42-year-old Marcus Wellington was reviewing quarterly reports in his corner office on the 47th floor of Wellington Industries, and the next, twisted metal and shattered glass were raining down on Interstate 405. The gas leak in the building's foundation had turned his empire's headquarters into a death trap that would claim 37 lives and change his forever. Marcus remembered the searing heat against his face, the deafening roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, then the sensation of falling through what used to be his office floor. After that, nothing but darkness for 3 long months. When consciousness finally returned, Dr. Sarah Chen's voice was the first thing he heard through the fog of medication and confusion. "Mr. Wellington, you're at Cedars Sinai Medical Center. There was an explosion at your building. You've been in a medically induced coma for 12 weeks. I need you to stay calm while I explain your condition." Marcus tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. My employees. How many?" 37 people didn't make it out," Dr. Chen said gently. "You were found in the stairwell on the 20th floor. The paramedics said you were trying to help evacuate others when the second blast brought down that section of the building." The weight of those words hit him harder than any physical pain. 37 families destroyed. People who had trusted him, worked for him, followed his vision. Gone because of faulty infrastructure in a building he owned. "Mr. Wellington, I need you to try moving your fingers for me," Dr. Chen continued, her voice taking on a more clinical tone. Marcus concentrated with everything he had, willing his right hand to respond. Nothing. He tried his left hand, then his arms. Nothing. Panic began to set in as he attempted to move his legs, to feel anything below his neck. I can't move anything," he whispered, the reality beginning to dawn on him. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair beside his bed. She was a small Asian woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that had clearly delivered difficult news many times before. "Marcus, the explosion caused severe trauma to your spinal cord at the C4 vertebra. This has resulted in complete paralysis from the chest down. You'll retain some function in your shoulders and limited arm movement, but I'll never walk again." The words came out flat, emotionless. His mind was already calculating, processing, trying to understand what this meant for everything he'd built. "The good news," Dr. Chen continued, "is that your cognitive function is completely intact. Your company has been running under temporary management, and from what I understand, quite successfully. Your assistant, Janet Morrison, has been coordinating everything." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the white ceiling tiles, each one representing another piece of his old life slipping away. Wellington Industries, his life's work, built from a small tech startup in his garage into a $23 billion empire spanning software development, renewable energy, and aerospace technology. How could he run board meetings from a hospital bed? How could he sign contracts when he couldn't hold a pen? How could he command respect when he couldn't even stand? His assistant Janet appeared in the doorway later that afternoon. She'd worked for him for 15 years, starting as a junior secretary and growing into his most trusted advisor. At 58, she knew every detail of his business operations, every contact in his phone, every preference in his daily routine. Her usually perfect composure cracked the moment she saw him conscious. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We've all been so worried. The whole company has been praying for you." "Janet," he managed, his voice stronger now. "I need you to tell me everything. Don't sugarcoat it. What's the real situation?" She pulled out her tablet, falling back into professional mode. "The insurance investigation is ongoing, but preliminary reports suggest it was a gas line rupture, not terrorism or sabotage." The company's stock dropped initially, but has recovered to about 85% of pre-accident levels. We've had 3 major clients postpone contracts pending your return and—" She hesitated. "And what?" "James Henderson from Goldman Sachs has been calling daily. He's been very persistent about wanting to discuss strategic opportunities with you once you're recovered." Marcus felt cold rage building in his chest, the only place he could still feel anything. James Henderson had been circling Wellington Industries for years like a vulture, looking for any sign of weakness. The man had tried to engineer 2 hostile takeover attempts in the past decade, both of which Marcus had fought off through sheer determination and superior strategy. "What kind of strategic opportunities?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "He hasn't been specific, but he keeps mentioning something about ensuring continuity of leadership during your recovery period." His words, not mine. That night, alone with the beeping of life support machines and the soft footsteps of night shift nurses, Marcus stared into the darkness and tried to comprehend the magnitude of what he was facing. $23 billion in assets, 15,000 employees across 12 countries. Contracts worth hundreds of millions pending his signature, and he couldn't even scratch his own nose. He thought about his father, who had built a small construction company from nothing and worked 16-hour days until the heart attack that killed him at 68. "Never show weakness in business, son," his father had always said. "The moment they smell blood in the water, the sharks start circling." Well, the sharks were definitely circling now. He didn't know that 50 miles away in East Los Angeles, a 7-year-old girl named Luna Reyes was lying awake in her narrow bed at the Maple Street group home, staring at her own ceiling and wondering if anyone would ever want to adopt a girl who asked too many questions and noticed things other people missed. He didn't know that this little girl collected discarded papers from dumpsters, reading everything she could find because books were scarce at the group home. And he certainly didn't know that in exactly 6 months, this observant child would walk into his life and save everything he'd built. But tonight, all Marcus knew was that he had to find a way to fight from a hospital bed or lose everything his father had taught him to value. 6 months later, Marcus had adapted to his new reality with the same ruthless efficiency that had built his empire. His Malibu mansion, a sprawling glass and stone structure overlooking the Pacific, was now equipped with state-of-the-art accessibility technology. Eye-tracking software allowed him to control computers, tablets, and phones with just his gaze. A specialized wheelchair gave him mobility and a measure of independence he'd fought hard to achieve. The physical therapy had been brutal. Learning to navigate the world from a seated position, mastering the adaptive equipment, rebuilding muscle strength in his shoulders and arms, all of it had required the same determination he'd once applied to closing billion-dollar deals. But adapting to technology was proving easier than adapting to the circling sharks who sensed opportunity in his vulnerability. "Marcus, you need to face facts," said his longtime friend and attorney, Robert Chase, as they sat in Marcus's home office on a grey February afternoon. The room was a monument to his former life. Walls lined with awards, photos of him shaking hands with presidents and tech titans, framed articles from Forbes and Fortune chronicling his rise from garage startup to billionaire. Robert was 62, silver-haired, and had been Marcus's legal counsel for over 2 decades. He'd helped structure every major acquisition, fought off every lawsuit, and negotiated contracts worth billions. But today, his usual confidence seemed strained. "The Khalil Group has made a very generous offer," Robert continued, spreading documents across the massive oak desk that dominated the room. $23 billion for full acquisition. That's actually above current market value, considering the uncertainty surrounding your situation. Ahmed Khalil. Marcus had dealt with the Saudi businessman several times over the years, brilliant, patient, and ruthlessly strategic. The kind of man who thought in decades rather than quarters, who waited years for the perfect opportunity to strike. Khalil had built his fortune in oil before diversifying into technology, real estate, and aerospace. His acquisition style was legendary. Identify vulnerable targets, make generous offers, then optimize operations with surgical precision. I'm not selling, Robert. This company is my legacy. It's everything I've worked for since I was 25 years old. Robert leaned back in his chair, frustration evident in his voice. Legacy? Marcus, you can barely sign your own name without adaptive equipment. How are you going to run a $23 billion corporation? The board is getting nervous. Shareholders are asking questions, and frankly, you've already lost ground. The words stung because they held undeniable truth. In 6 months, Marcus had already lost 3 major contracts due to delayed decision-making processes. Board meetings had become awkward affairs where he struggled with the basic mechanics of communication. His eye-tracking system sometimes lagged, making real-time negotiations nearly impossible. Competitors were whispering that Wellington Industries was rudderless, a ship without a captain. The Henderson situation last month was a disaster, Robert continued. When you couldn't respond quickly enough during that video conference with the Pentagon, they awarded the defense contract to Lockheed instead. That was a $400 million deal, Marcus. Marcus remembered that meeting with painful clarity. General Patricia Morrison had been asking detailed technical questions about satellite guidance systems, and his eye-tracking software had frozen during a critical moment. The silence that followed, 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, had been devastating. He'd seen the doubt creep into the general's eyes, the subtle shift in body language that indicated a decision being reconsidered. I've been thinking about this for weeks, Robert said, his tone gentler now. Khalil is offering you a consulting position. You'd retain 5% ownership and have significant input on major strategic decisions. You'd still be involved, still have influence, but without the day-to-day operational stress. That evening, Marcus sat alone on his terrace, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. The waves rolled endlessly toward shore, indifferent to human struggles and ambitions. His nurse, Patricia Williams, brought him dinner, a carefully prepared meal that he could manage independently using adaptive utensils, another small victory in his ongoing battle for dignity. You're thinking too hard again, Patricia observed. She was a 60-year-old African-American woman who'd seen everything in her 30-year nursing career. Combat veterans, stroke victims, accident survivors. She'd helped them all navigate the treacherous waters of life-altering disability. I can practically see those wheels turning from here. Patricia, what would you do if everything you'd worked for your entire life was slowly slipping away and everyone around you was telling you to just give up and accept it? She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkening ocean. I'd remember that sometimes losing what we think we want makes room for what we actually need. But I'd also remember that giving up and letting go are 2 different things entirely. Marcus didn't understand the distinction. Not yet. The next morning brought a call that would change everything. Janet's voice was tight with tension as she delivered the news. Marcus, Khalil's people, contacted Robert this morning. They want to expedite the process. They're prepared to bring contracts to the house tomorrow for your signature. Robert says the offer won't stay on the table much longer. There are other opportunities competing for Khalil's attention. As Marcus hung up, he realized that tomorrow might be the day he signed away everything his father had taught him to fight for. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Marcus had positioned himself strategically in his study, the same room where he'd negotiated hundreds of deals worth billions of dollars. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Pacific coastline, and he'd always found that clients were subtly influenced by the display of success and power that surrounded them. Today, he needed every psychological advantage he could muster. Ahmed Khalil arrived precisely at 2 p.m. Punctuality was one of his trademarks. He was accompanied by 3 associates, his chief legal counsel, a financial analyst, and a translator, though Khalil's English was flawless. At 55, he cut an imposing figure, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Savile Row suit, with silver threading through his dark hair and the calm confidence that came from controlling billions of dollars in assets. "Marcus, my friend," Khalil said warmly as he entered the study, though his dark eyes remained calculating and cold. "I am deeply sorry we meet under these circumstances, but I believe this arrangement will benefit everyone involved, your employees, your shareholders, and most importantly, you." The contracts were spread across Marcus's mahogany desk like battle plans. The stack was easily 3 inches thick. Acquisition agreements, employment guarantees, transition protocols, and dozens of subsidiary documents that would take a team of lawyers weeks to fully digest. At the center of it all was a single page, with a number that still seemed surreal, $23,000. Robert Chase had arrived an hour early to review everything one final time. He looked exhausted. This deal had consumed his life for the past month. "Marcus, I've been through every clause 3 times. The terms are more than fair. Khalil's group commits to maintaining all current employment levels for at least 2 years. Your key employees will receive retention bonuses, and your consulting contract guarantees significant input on all major strategic decisions." Marcus studied the documents through his eye-tracking display, each page representing another step away from the life he'd built. The financial terms were indeed generous, perhaps too generous. In his gut, something felt wrong, but his rational mind couldn't identify what. Every clause seemed reasonable, every protection seemed adequate. "I notice you've included provisions for facility upgrades," Marcus observed, his voice carefully neutral. "New equipment, efficiency improvements, technology integration, that's a substantial investment." Khalil smiled, an expression that never quite reached his eyes. "We believe in maximizing the potential of every acquisition. Wellington Industries has incredible assets, brilliant people, cutting-edge technology, established relationships. With proper investment and optimization, we can enhance performance significantly." Optimization. That's an interesting word choice. "Marcus, please," Robert interjected. "We've been over this. Khalil's track record speaks for itself. His acquisitions consistently outperform market averages. Your people will be better off, not worse." But something in Khalil's micro-expressions troubled Marcus. In 30 years of high-stakes negotiations, he'd learned to read the subtle tells that revealed true intentions. The way Khalil's left eye tightened slightly when discussing employee retention, the barely perceptible pause before answering questions about operational changes, the careful phrasing that promised much while committing to little. "I need time to think," Marcus said finally. Khalil's smile remained perfectly in place, but Marcus caught the flash of irritation in his eyes. "Of course, my friend. But Marcus, you must understand, opportunities like this don't wait forever. The market is volatile. My investors are eager to move forward, but their patience isn't infinite. We have other potential acquisitions under consideration." The implied threat was subtle but clear. Sign now, or watch the offer disappear. After Khalil and his team departed, Marcus was alone with Robert in the study. His friend looked more exhausted than ever, and Marcus realized this ordeal was taking a toll on everyone around him. "Marcus, please. I've known you for 22 years. You're a brilliant businessman, but you're also human. This accident changed things fundamentally. There's no shame in accepting that reality and making the best possible arrangement for everyone involved." That night, Marcus called his sister Emma in Portland. She was his only remaining family since their parents had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Emma was a high school teacher, married with 2 teenage daughters, living a quiet life that seemed impossibly distant from his world of billion-dollar deals and corporate warfare. "Marcus, I've been thinking about you all day," she said before he could speak. "How are you holding up?" "Emma, I'm thinking about selling the company." The silence stretched so long he thought the connection had failed. "Marcus, are you sure? That company isn't just your work, it's who you are. It's been your identity for as long as I can remember." "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I built my entire identity around something that I can't actually control anymore. Maybe I am nothing without it." "Don't say that." Emma's voice was fierce. "You're my big brother who taught me to ride a bike when Dad was too busy. You're the man who put me through college when I couldn't get financial aid. You're the person who donated $50 million to children's hospitals without telling anyone because you said kids shouldn't suffer for adults' mistakes. You're so much more than a company, Marcus." But as Marcus hung up the phone, staring out at the dark ocean, he wasn't convinced. Without Wellington Industries, who was he? A paralyzed man in a wheelchair, dependent on others for basic functions, unable to contribute anything meaningful to the world. The contract sat on his desk like a surrender document, waiting for his signature. Tomorrow, he would call Robert and tell him to schedule the signing ceremony. 3 sleepless nights later, Marcus made his decision. Thursday morning, he called Robert and asked him to contact Khalil immediately. The signing ceremony would take place the following Monday at 10 a.m. in his study. The news would be released to the press Tuesday morning. Wellington Industries sold to the Khalil Group for $23 billion, with founder Marcus Wellington remaining as a strategic consultant. "You're making the right choice," Robert assured him over the phone. "This will give you freedom to focus on your recovery and maybe find new purpose. There are 1,000 ways to make a meaningful impact with this kind of financial security." New purpose. The words felt hollow, meaningless. Marcus was 42 years old, paralyzed from the chest down, and about to become one of the wealthiest men in America with absolutely nothing meaningful to do with his remaining years. The signing was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Khalil would arrive with the final documents, clean copies of everything they'd reviewed, with all negotiated modifications incorporated. Marcus would sign using his adaptive signature device, a process that took about 30 seconds per document. 27 years of building, innovating, and fighting would end in approximately 20 minutes. Over the weekend, Marcus found himself taking inventory of his life in a way he never had before. His mansion felt like a museum dedicated to someone else's achievements. Every award on the wall, every framed photo, every trophy represented a version of himself that no longer existed. The man who had built Wellington Industries could walk, could grab people by the shoulder to make a point, could command a room through sheer physical presence. That man was gone, and Marcus wasn't sure who had taken his place. Sunday evening, he rolled his wheelchair out onto the terrace for what felt like the last time as CEO of Wellington Industries. The sunset was particularly spectacular, brilliant oranges and purples painting the sky in ways that reminded him why he'd bought this house 12 years ago. Back then, he'd been 30, hungry, convinced he could conquer the world through willpower and intelligence. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Never sell what you love, son. Money comes and goes, but passion gives life meaning. The day you stop caring about the work itself is the day you should walk away." But passion didn't seem to matter when you couldn't even walk. Patricia found him there 3 hours later, staring at the stars that had emerged as full darkness settled over the coast. She'd worked double shifts all weekend, sensing his emotional turmoil and wanting to provide extra support during this transition. "You know," she said, settling into the chair beside him, "I've been thinking about what you told me last week, about losing everything you worked for. What about it? I don't think that's what's really happening here. I think you're letting go of something that was killing you slowly, and you're just too proud to see it." Marcus turned to look at her. "What do you mean? When's the last time you were happy, really happy, not just satisfied with closing a deal or beating a competitor? When's the last time you felt joy?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time? He couldn't remember. The last 5 years had been an endless series of battles, hostile takeover attempts, regulatory challenges, competitive threats. He'd been so focused on protecting and growing Wellington Industries that he'd forgotten why he'd started the company in the first place. "You started this company to solve problems, didn't you?" Patricia continued. To build technology that would make people's lives better. When did it become about the money and the power instead of the mission? Monday morning arrived grey and overcast, fitting Marcus's mood perfectly. He dressed in his best suit, navy blue Armani that had been specially tailored for his wheelchair. If he was going to surrender his empire, he would look dignified doing it. At 9:45 a.m., Khalil's black Mercedes S-Class pulled into the circular driveway. Marcus watched from his window as the businessman emerged, carrying a leather briefcase that contained Marcus's future. Two associates followed, also carrying briefcases. The final paperwork was apparently substantial. "You ready for this?" Patricia asked gently as she helped him adjust his tie. Marcus nodded, though ready was entirely the wrong word. No one was ever ready to sign away their life's work. He was simply out of viable alternatives. At exactly 10 a.m., Khalil was escorted into the study by Janet. The final contract, all 47 pages of it, was placed reverently before Marcus on the mahogany desk where he'd negotiated thousands of deals. The signature line waited at the bottom of page 47, next to a number that still seemed impossible even after months of preparation. 23,000. A historic moment, Khalil said solemnly, though Marcus detected a note of triumph in his voice. The end of one era, the beginning of another. Marcus, your legacy will live on through our stewardship of your creation. Marcus positioned his adaptive signature device over the document and prepared to sign his name for the last time as CEO and majority owner of Wellington Industries. His hand trembled slightly, not from emotion, but from the physical effort required to maintain fine motor control. He was 3 seconds away from touching pen to paper when a child's voice rang out from somewhere behind him. "Stop! Don't sign that paper, mister!" Every head in the room spun toward the voice. Standing in the doorway was a small Latina girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She had enormous dark eyes that seemed far too serious for her age, shoulder-length black hair that looked like it had been cut with kitchen scissors, and she wore a faded pink t-shirt with well-worn jeans that were slightly too big for her thin frame. Most striking was the way she held herself, straight-backed and determined, like a tiny warrior preparing for battle. "What in the world?" Robert began, rising from his chair. "How did you get past security?" Khalil demanded, his carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time since Marcus had known him. The businessman's face had gone pale, and there was something almost panicked in his expression. The little girl ignored both men completely, walking directly to Marcus's wheelchair with a confidence that was startling in someone so young. Up close, Marcus could see that despite her brave posture, she was thin, too thin, and there was an old sadness in her young eyes that shouldn't have been there. She clutched a small, worn backpack against her chest, like a shield. "My name is Luna," she said simply, her voice clear and steady, despite the roomful of adults staring at her. "Luna Reyes. And that man right there is lying to you about everything." She pointed directly at Khalil, who had gone from pale to visibly sweating. Patricia appeared in the doorway, looking flustered and slightly out of breath. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wellington." She somehow got past the front gate security and was hiding in the garden. "I'll call the police and—" "Wait," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Something about the child's presence had shifted the entire energy of the room. There was an intelligence in her eyes that belied her age. And the way Khalil was reacting suggested this wasn't a simple case of a lost child wandering onto his property. "Luna, how do you know that man is lying to me?" Luna reached into her backpack, a small Disney princess bag that had seen better days, and pulled out several crumpled pieces of paper. "Because I found these in the dumpster behind the Beverly Hills Hotel yesterday morning. I can read pretty good for 7. My foster mom, Mrs. Rodriguez, taught me before she got too sick to keep me." She held up the papers, and Marcus felt his heart stop. Even from his wheelchair, he could see they were printed on official Khalil Group letterhead. The documents were partially shredded but still largely readable, as if someone had torn them up hastily and thrown them away without ensuring complete destruction. Khalil lunged forward, desperation replacing his usual calculated demeanor. "Those are confidential business documents that have no bearing on our current transaction. The man wants to buy your company so he can fire everybody and sell all the pieces," Luna continued, her voice steady despite Khalil's intimidating presence looming over her. "He's gonna close down your factories and keep all the money for himself. It says so right here in black and white." She held up the largest piece of paper, pointing to specific sections with her small finger. "See? It says Phase 2, asset liquidation, and Phase 3, personnel reduction. That means firing people, right?" Marcus used his eye-tracking system to magnify the document on his computer screen. Even torn and coffee-stained, the memo was devastatingly clear. The header read, "Project Wellington, Post-Acquisition Implementation Strategy," dated just 5 days ago. The content was a detailed plan that made Marcus's blood run cold. Phase 1, complete acquisition at premium price to ensure cooperation. Phase 2, immediate liquidation of all physical assets, facilities and equipment. Phase 3, termination of all personnel within 90 days of closing. Phase 4, transfer of intellectual property and client relationships to existing Khalil subsidiaries. Projected additional profit from asset liquidation. $8. $7 billion above acquisition cost. The room fell into absolute silence, except for the sound of ocean waves outside and Khalil's increasingly labored breathing. "Ahmed," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm that had once made competitors tremble. "Would you like to explain this document to me?" Khalil's face had gone from pale to grey. His hands were shaking as he reached for the papers. "That document, it's taken completely out of context. It's just one of many scenarios we explore in our due diligence process. It doesn't represent our actual intentions." It's dated last Thursday," Luna said matter-of-factly, apparently unimpressed by the drama she'd unleashed. "And there's a stamp at the bottom that says, Approved for implementation, AK. That's your initials, isn't it, mister?" Robert was studying the shredded memo with growing horror. "Marcus, if this document is authentic—" "Oh, it's real," Luna said cheerfully. She reached into her backpack again and pulled out more papers. "I got a whole bunch more stuff too. Want to see the one where they talk about how they're gonna say you're too sick in the head to know what you're signing? Or the one where they figure out how to blame the firings on market conditions so nobody gets suspicious?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt a rage building in his chest, unlike anything he'd experienced since the accident. Not the helpless fury of a man trapped in a broken body, but the cold, focused anger of a businessman who just discovered he was being systematically destroyed. This 7-year-old child, this throwaway kid from the foster system, had just uncovered the biggest corporate fraud attempted in California in decades. Khalil's carefully constructed facade didn't just crack, it collapsed entirely, like a building with its foundation suddenly removed. "You don't understand the complexities of international business," he said desperately, sweat now visible on his forehead despite the cool March weather. "Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for long-term market stability. These documents represent contingency planning, not definitive strategies." "Get out," Marcus said, his voice carrying the full authority that had once commanded boardrooms from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. "Robert, please escort Mr. Khalil and his associates off my property immediately." "Marcus, please, if you would just allow me to provide proper context for these materials," Khalil began, reaching toward the documents that Luna still held protectively against her chest. "Security!" Marcus called, his voice echoing through the mansion. Within 30 seconds, 2 uniformed guards appeared in the doorway, retired police officers he employed full-time since the accident had made him more conscious of his vulnerability. "These gentlemen are leaving my property," Marcus continued, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Immediately, and they're not to return under any circumstances." And as the security team moved to escort Khalil and his associates out, the Saudi businessman shot one last venomous look at Luna. His mask had slipped completely now, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "This isn't over," he muttered, though whether he was speaking to Marcus or the little girl wasn't clear. When the room was finally quiet again, just Marcus, Robert, Patricia and Luna, Marcus found himself studying the child who had just saved his company and possibly his life. She stood perfectly still beside his wheelchair, as if waiting for judgment, her small hands folded in front of her. Despite everything that had just happened, she seemed calm, almost serene. "Luna," Marcus said gently, "how did you know to look for those papers? That's a very specific place to search for information about my company." She shrugged with the casual manner of a child discussing something obvious. "I live at the Maple Street Group home about 10 miles from here. Sometimes I go through dumpsters early in the morning, looking for bottles and cans to return for money. The other kids think it's gross, but 5 cents is 5 cents, you know." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, not physical pain, but a deep emotional recognition he hadn't experienced since his father's death. "Yesterday morning I was checking the dumpster behind the fancy hotel, and I saw a whole bunch of papers with Wellington Industries written on them. I recognized the name from the TV news. They've been talking about you getting hurt and maybe selling your company. I figured if somebody was throwing away papers about your business, maybe they were up to something bad." Robert was reviewing the documents with growing amazement and what looked like professional embarrassment. "Marcus, this child just uncovered a conspiracy that my entire legal team missed. They were planning to commit one of the largest corporate frauds in American history, and we were about to hand them the keys to do it." Patricia knelt down to Luna's eye level, her nurse's instincts taking over. "Sweetie, how did you get here from Maple Street? That's almost 10 miles away, and you're just a little girl." "I took 3 different buses," Luna said proudly. "Cost me all my bottle money, $2.75. But I had to come warn him. It wasn't right, what they were planning to do to all those people who work for him." The simple morality of her statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child, orphaned, living in foster care, scrounging through garbage to earn pocket change, had spent her last few dollars on bus fare to warn a complete stranger about an injustice she'd discovered by accident. "Luna," Marcus said quietly, "where are your parents?" "Don't have any," she replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "They died in a car crash when I was 4. Drunk driver hit them on the 405 freeway. I've been in foster care ever since, but nobody ever wants to adopt me permanently. Mrs. Rodriguez says I ask too many questions and notice things that make grown-ups uncomfortable." "How long have you been at the Maple Street Group home?" Patricia asked gently. "About 6 months. I was with the Hendersons before that, but they said I was too much trouble. And before them, I was with the Johnsons, but they moved to Arizona and couldn't take me. And before that," she trailed off with another shrug. "I don't really remember all of them anymore." Marcus looked at this remarkable little girl, really looked at her for the first time. 7 years old, bounced between foster families, living in an institutional group home, yet she possessed a moral clarity and courage that had just saved 15,000 jobs and billions of dollars in assets. She had risked her safety, spent her only money, and confronted powerful adults to protect people she'd never met. "Luna," he said quietly, "would you like to have lunch with me? I think we need to talk more. But first, I want to call the group home and let them know you're safe." For the first time since she'd burst into his study, the little girl's composure wavered slightly. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "I'd like that a lot, Mr. Wellington, but I gotta be back by dinner time, or Mrs. Rodriguez will worry. She's got 12 kids to keep track of, and I don't want to make her job harder." As Patricia led Luna toward the kitchen, Marcus remained alone in his study, staring at the unsigned contract that would have destroyed everything he'd built. 47 pages of legal documents that would have made him $23 billion richer and 15,000 people unemployed. A 7-year-old child had seen what he, his lawyers, and his business advisors had all missed. not because she was smarter, but because she still possessed something the adult world had trained out of most people, the simple belief that protecting others from harm was more important than personal gain. Robert was shaking his head in disbelief as he gathered up Khalil's abandoned contracts. "Marcus, we need to call the FBI immediately. This is criminal conspiracy on a massive scale." But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely. Patricia had been right weeks ago when she'd said that sometimes losing what you think you want makes room for what you actually need. Maybe what he needed wasn't to sign away his life's work to focus on his limitations. Maybe what he needed was to remember why he'd built Wellington Industries in the first place. Not to accumulate wealth or power, but to solve problems and make people's lives better. And maybe, just maybe, what he needed most was to learn from a 7-year-old girl who understood something about courage and purpose that he'd forgotten somewhere along the way. Over lunch on the terrace, Marcus discovered that Luna Reyes was unlike any 7-year-old he'd ever encountered. She ate her grilled cheese sandwich with careful precision, occasionally pointing out dolphins in the distance. "You built this house to feel powerful, didn't you?" she asked between bites, studying the glass walls and expensive furnishings. "All the windows face the ocean, so visitors know you can afford the best view." And Marcus nearly choked on his soup. "That's remarkably perceptive for someone your age. I notice things. Mrs. Rodriguez says it's why families don't want to keep me long-term. People don't like kids who see too much." She shrugged. "But I can't help what I notice. Luna, why did you really come here today?" She gazed out at the ocean. "Because on TV, they said you might lose your company and all those people might lose their jobs. My dad lost his job right before the accident, and my mom was scared we'd lose our apartment. I didn't want other kids to feel that scared." After lunch, Marcus insisted on driving Luna back to the Maple Street group home. The converted Victorian house showed signs of wear: peeling paint, worn yard, overcrowded conditions. Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the door, clearly confused by the luxury car in her driveway. "Luna Maria Reyes, where have you been? I've been worried sick." As Marcus explained the morning's events, he studied the environment. 12 children lived here with Mrs. Rodriguez and 2 part-time assistants. The house was clean but stretched beyond capacity, with bunk beds filling every space. "Luna's special," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. "Too smart for her own good sometimes, but she's got the biggest heart. She shares everything, even when she has almost nothing." That evening, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Luna's words. "I didn't want other kids to feel that scared." This child had risked everything to protect strangers from experiencing her own childhood fears. He pulled up Wellington Industries Foundation records. They donated millions over the years, mostly tax-advantaged contributions to established charities. But when had he last personally seen the faces of people his wealth was supposed to help? The next morning brought a call from FBI agent Sarah Martinez. Khalil's investigation was moving quickly. Luna's documents were enough to trigger federal charges for securities fraud and conspiracy. "Mr. Wellington, that little girl saved you from losing billions and saved 15,000 jobs. I've investigated white-collar crime for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Marcus was already thinking beyond the investigation. He called Janet into his study. "I want to establish a new division, Wellington Foundation for Children. Focus on improving outcomes for kids in foster care, education, technology access, mentorship programs." "What kind of budget?" Janet asked. "Start with 50 million annually." "And Janet?" "I want to visit every facility personally. No more writing checks from a distance." 2 days later, Marcus returned to the group home with a specific purpose. He'd researched foster care statistics, over 400,000 children nationwide, aging out at 18 with minimal support. "Luna," he said as they sat in the small library, "I have a proposition. I want to hire you as a consultant for Wellington Industries." "A consultant?" Luna's eyes widened. "What kind of consulting? I don't know about business stuff." "You know about being 7 and living in the system." You know what it feels like to be overlooked. That's expertise I can't buy anywhere else." Marcus leaned forward. "But there's something else. I'd like you to spend weekends at my house. I have a huge library, tutors available, and we could learn from each other." Luna was quiet for a moment. "Why me? There are lots of kids here who need help." "Because you saw something wrong and fixed it, even when it cost you everything. That's not common, Luna. That's extraordinary." Mrs. Rodriguez was initially hesitant, but after meeting with Marcus's legal team and social workers, she agreed to a trial period. Luna would spend Friday evenings through Sunday afternoons at the mansion, with strict protocols and regular CPS check-ins. That first weekend, Marcus discovered Luna was brilliant. She absorbed information like a sponge, asked challenging questions, and approached problems with unique perspective, combining childlike directness with surprising wisdom. "Why do you have so many cars?" she asked Saturday morning in his garage. "You can only drive one at a time, and you can't drive any of them anymore." The question stopped him cold. 7 vehicles worth more than most people's houses, and he hadn't considered the absurdity until a 7-year-old pointed it out. "You're absolutely right. Let's sell 6 of them and donate the money to buy a van for the group home." By Sunday evening, Marcus realized something profound had shifted. For the first time since his accident, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. Instead, he was excited about what he might build, not corporate assets, but human potential. The following week, Luna accompanied him to Wellington Industries headquarters. The rebuilt building had state-of-the-art accessibility features throughout. As they toured facilities, Luna asked pointed questions that made Marcus see his company through fresh eyes. "How come all the important people work on top floors and cleaning people work in the basement?" she wondered during a board meeting. "Seems like people who take care of everyone should get nice views too." Board member Harrison Webb looked uncomfortable. "Well, that's how office buildings are traditionally organized. But traditions can change, right?" Luna looked at Marcus. "You could change it if you wanted to." Within a month, Marcus implemented the Luna Initiative. Rotating workspace assignments, giving every employee time in premium office spaces. Productivity increased as people felt valued and collaboration improved. The FBI investigation concluded with Khalil's arrest. But for Marcus, the real victory was watching Luna flourish. She was reading at high school level, learning programming, and developing detailed foster care improvement plans. "She's not just smart," observed Dr. Jennifer Chen, the child psychologist Marcus hired. "She's profoundly gifted, top 1% intellectually, but more importantly, she has emotional intelligence that's off the charts." One evening, watching the sunset, Luna asked the question Marcus had been expecting. "Mr. Wellington, do you think maybe, could you adopt me?" Marcus felt his heart racing. "Luna, I would love nothing more. But adoption is complicated, especially for someone in my situation. Are you sure?" "I've been thinking about it a lot. You need someone to help you remember what's important, and I need someone who believes I'm worth keeping. We make a good team." That night, Marcus called the best family law attorney in California. The adoption process proved more complex than any corporate merger Marcus had navigated. His disability raised questions about adequate care. Luna's history of multiple placements created additional scrutiny. The court-appointed guardian interviewed them separately and together. "Mr. Wellington," said Judge Patricia Morales during their hearing, "adopting a child is a lifetime commitment. Miss Reyes has experienced significant instability. How can the court be confident this placement won't fail?" Marcus had prepared extensively. "Your Honor, I can't promise I'll never make mistakes as a parent, but I can promise Luna will never doubt she's wanted, valued, and loved. She's already taught me more about courage than I've learned in my entire adult life." Guardian ad litem Sarah Kim spent weeks evaluating their home, interviewing Marcus's staff, observing their interactions. Her report was favorable. "In 30 years of child advocacy, I've never seen a more natural parent-child bond develop so quickly. This is not charity. This is a family that has chosen each other. During the waiting period, Marcus and Luna developed comfortable routines. Mornings began with breakfast on the terrace, while Luna read aloud from books that progressed from children's classics to biographies of inventors and reformers. "Did you know Helen Keller graduated from Harvard at 24? Luna asked one morning. "Everyone said she couldn't because she was deaf and blind, but she proved them wrong. Is there a reason you're telling me about Helen Keller? She wrote that life is either a daring adventure or nothing. I think she would have liked you. You're both adventurers who don't let disabilities stop important things." Afternoons were spent at Wellington Industries, where Luna became an unofficial consultant on employee satisfaction. Her suggestions, company daycare, flexible schedules, mentorship programs, transformed corporate culture. "She's revolutionizing how we think about business," marveled COO Maria Santos. "Yesterday, she suggested paid volunteer time at schools. When I asked why, she said happy workers make better products and helping kids makes people happy." Simple but brilliant. Evenings belonged to homework and planning sessions, discussions about expanding foundation work. Luna developed proposals for summer camps, bringing together foster children and traditional families. "Kids in foster care aren't broken," she explained to social workers and psychologists. "We just need the same chances, and regular kids need to learn families come in different shapes." The final adoption hearing was set for Friday morning in October, exactly 7 months after Luna had saved his company. Neither slept well the night before. "Are you nervous?" Luna asked in his study. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Not about the hearing, about being the father you deserve." "You're already the father I deserve. You listen, you believe in me, and you let me help with important stuff. That's what good parents do." The hearing was surprisingly brief. Judge Morales reviewed documentation, interviewed them once more, and rendered her decision. "The court finds this adoption is in the child's best interests and grants the petition. Mr. Wellington, you are now Luna's legal father. Luna, you are officially Luna Reyes Wellington." Leaving the courthouse, Luna slipped her hand into Marcus's. "Dad," she said, testing the word. "I like how that sounds." "So do I, sweetheart." 6 months into their new life as father and daughter, Marcus and Luna faced their first major crisis. It started with a Tuesday morning phone call that would test everything they'd built. "Mr. Wellington," Agent Martinez's voice was tense. "We have a problem. Ahmed Khalil posted bail yesterday and left the country. We believe he's planning retaliation against our key witness." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "You mean Luna? We're taking this seriously. Khalil has significant resources. We recommend enhanced security immediately." Within hours, the mansion became a fortress. Private guards patrolled grounds, bulletproof glass was installed in Luna's windows, and her school commute required 3-car escorts. Luna handled the disruption with typical directness. "This is stupid," she announced at dinner, watching a guard pass the window. "That man wants to hurt me because I caught him stealing, but hiding won't solve anything. Luna, this isn't about solving anything. It's about keeping you safe. But what kind of life is this? I can't play with other kids, can't go anywhere alone, and everyone thinks I'm weird because of security guards." Her voice cracked. "Maybe it would be better if I went back to the group home until this is over." The suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Don't say that. We're family now. Families stick together through hard times." "But I'm causing the hard times," Luna said quietly. "If something happens to you because of me." That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about courage and risk. How could he protect her while allowing her to be the remarkable child she was? The answer came from Mrs. Rodriguez, who arrived with a proposal from Luna's former housemates. "The kids want to help Luna. They've got an idea that might work." Luna's former group home friends had developed a plan with street-smart wisdom from surviving difficult circumstances. If Khalil was looking for one little girl, he'd have trouble tracking her as part of a group. "We want to be Luna's decoys," explained 13-year-old Miguel. "We take turns being Luna in public. Similar clothes, same hairstyle, traveling with security. Meanwhile, real Luna stays safe but mobile." The FBI initially resisted, but Agent Martinez agreed to a modified version. Young female agents resembling Luna would serve as decoys, while Luna maintained more normal routines with lighter security. The strategy worked brilliantly. Khalil's associates chased false leads across California while Luna attended school and continued foundation activities. But the real breakthrough came when Luna suggested the solution that would end the threat permanently. "Dad, what if we don't hide from Mr. Khalil? What if we find him first?" Marcus stared at his 8-year-old daughter with amazement. "Luna, he's a dangerous criminal, but he's also a businessman who cares about money more than anything. What if we offered him something he wants more than revenge?" Luna's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Through leaked information, they'd let Khalil know Marcus would testify the fraud documents were forgeries in exchange for financial settlement and Khalil's permanent departure from the United States. "It's brilliant," admitted Agent Martinez. "We use his greed against him." The meeting was arranged for neutral ground, a downtown Los Angeles hotel conference room with FBI agents positioned throughout the building. Marcus attended via video conference from his secured office, with Luna listening from the next room, despite his protests. Khalil looked older, more desperate. Prison had not been kind, and fugitive stress showed in his hollow cheeks and nervous gestures. "Marcus, my friend," Khalil began, old charm replaced by barely concealed desperation. "I believe we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement, a simple retraction of testimony in exchange for $20 million. "I might consider it," Marcus replied carefully, following the FBI script, "but I need guarantees about my daughter's safety. The child will not be harmed if you cooperate. You have my word." "Your word?" Luna's voice suddenly came through the audio as she stepped into camera view. "Your word isn't worth anything, Mr. Khalil. You tried to steal my dad's company and fire 15,000 people. Khalil's face went pale, realizing he'd been recorded making direct threats. Agent Martinez and her team moved in before he could react. "Ahmed Khalil, you're under arrest for intimidation of a federal witness, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of bail conditions." As Khalil was led away in handcuffs, he shot one last look at the camera. "You think you've won, but people like you don't win in the real world." "People like us already won," Luna replied calmly. "We have each other." With Khalil permanently imprisoned, life gradually returned to normal. Luna threw herself back into studies and foundation work with renewed energy, while Marcus marveled at his daughter's resilience. Spring brought exciting news. Luna had been accepted into Stanford University's special gifted program, allowing exceptional young students to audit college courses while maintaining regular education. At 8, she'd be the youngest participant in program history. "Are you sure you want this?" Marcus asked, touring the campus. "It's a big commitment, and you'll be around much older students." Luna considered seriously. "Dad, remember when people said you were too young to start a company at 25? That's different. I was an adult. But the feeling is the same, isn't it? People saying you can't do something because of your age, disability, or whatever makes you different." She looked up with those serious dark eyes. "I want to prove being different can be an advantage." The Stanford program proved exactly what Luna needed. She excelled in mathematics, computer science, and philosophy, often asking questions that challenged professors' assumptions. She formed friendships with older students who appreciated her unique perspective. Marcus discovered new dimensions of fatherhood. Luna's presence had transformed not just his home life, but his business approach. Wellington Industries was implementing revolutionary employee benefits, on-site childcare, mental health support, educational assistance, all suggested by Luna's observations about what families needed. "She's changing entire corporate culture," observed Dr. Patricia Williams, the industrial psychologist Marcus hired. "Workers feel valued as whole people. Turnover is down 60%. Innovation metrics are through the roof." One evening, Luna approached Marcus with a surprising proposal. "Dad, I want to start my own foundation. For kids like me, gifted kids in foster care who get labeled difficult because they're too smart. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning, Marcus sat in Stanford's Memorial Auditorium watching his 10-year-old daughter address educators, philanthropists, and child welfare experts from around the world. Luna had been invited to deliver the keynote at the International Conference on Gifted Children in Care. "When I was 7, Luna began, her voice carrying clearly, I was just another throwaway kid in foster care, too smart for my own good, too curious about things that made adults uncomfortable, too different to fit anyone's idea of the perfect adoptable child." Marcus felt familiar pride mixed with amazement. This poised, articulate young woman bore little resemblance to the thin, frightened child who had burst into his study 3 years ago, yet her core remained unchanged. The moral courage, fierce intelligence, determination to protect others. "But being different isn't a disadvantage," Luna continued. "It's a superpower waiting to be activated. Every child in foster care has survived things that would break many adults. That survival instinct, combined with right educational opportunities and emotional support, can change the world." The audience hung on every word. In 3 years since founding her organization, Luna had helped identify and support over 1,500 gifted children in foster care. 63 had received full college scholarships, 12 had started businesses, and one 14-year-old former foster child had just been accepted to MIT. "My dad taught me that success isn't about what you accumulate," Luna said, looking directly at Marcus. "It's about what you contribute. The Different is Brilliant Foundation isn't just about helping smart kids. It's about recognizing that every child has unique value, and society benefits when we nurture that potential." After the speech, they were surrounded by admirers, researchers, journalists. Luna handled attention gracefully, redirecting credit to social workers, foster parents, and educators doing daily support work. "Miss Wellington," asked Dr. Fausch, Sarah Kim, now Luna's friend rather than court-appointed guardian, "what advice would you give children who feel different or unwanted?" Luna considered with characteristic seriousness. "I'd tell them that feeling different means you're seeing something others miss. Don't try to fit in. Use that different perspective to make things better. And remember that being unwanted by some people doesn't mean you're unwanted by everyone. Somewhere is your family. Maybe one you're born into, maybe one you choose, maybe one that chooses you, but it exists." That evening, back home in Malibu, Marcus and Luna sat on their terrace watching sunset over the Pacific. Their sacred time, no phones, no work, just father and daughter processing the day. "Dad, I've been thinking," Luna said, legs swinging from her adult-sized chair. "In 2 years, when I turn 12, I want to start taking college courses full-time. Stanford offered me early admission to their undergraduate program." Marcus felt familiar parental anxiety. "That's wonderful, but are you sure you want to skip being a kid?" "I'm not skipping being a kid. I'm just being a different kind of kid. Besides, you started Wellington Industries at 25, when everyone said you were too young. I want to start changing the world at 12. "And what exactly do you want to change?" Luna's expression grew serious. "Everything. The foster care system, education inequality, how society treats people who are different. I want to build something bigger than a foundation. I want to create a movement." Marcus studied his daughter's face in fading light. At 10, she possessed clarity of purpose that had taken him decades to develop. She was fluent in 3 programming languages, had published papers on educational psychology, and corresponded with Nobel Prize winners seeking her perspective. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was your age, I wanted to be rich and important. You want to change the world. I like your goals better." "Rich and important are just side effects," Luna replied matter-of-factly. "The real goal is making sure other kids don't have to feel as alone as I did before I found you." As stars appeared over the ocean, Marcus reflected on their extraordinary journey. 3 years ago, he'd been a bitter, isolated man whose life had been reduced to protecting what he'd built. Today, he was part of something infinitely more valuable, a family bound by choice and mutual love. Luna, I need to tell you something important. What? That day you walked into my study and saved my company. You didn't just save Wellington Industries, you saved me. You reminded me what it means to have purpose beyond profit, courage beyond comfort, and love beyond limits. Luna climbed onto his lap. She still fit, though not much longer. We saved each other, Dad. That's what families do. Under the stars, Marcus thought about the future. Luna would indeed change the world. He had no doubt. She would break barriers, challenge assumptions, create opportunities for countless written-off children. She would build something beautiful from her early pain. But more than that, she had already changed his world completely. She had transformed a man focused on accumulating wealth into a father dedicated to nurturing human potential. House into home, business into mission, life into legacy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Luna had speaking engagements, congressional testimony on foster care reform, collaboration with MIT researchers developing AI systems to identify at-risk gifted children. But tonight, Marcus Wellington was simply a father holding his daughter under starlight, marveling at mysterious forces that brought them together and grateful for the privilege of watching her illuminate the world. I love you, Luna. I love you too, Dad, forever and always. As Luna fell asleep in his arms, Marcus made a silent promise. He would spend every remaining day ensuring his daughter had every opportunity to fulfill the breathtaking potential she carried within her small but mighty heart. The little girl, who had once been nobody's child, had become everyone's hope for a better tomorrow. Arabic translator quits and millionaire loses 3.9b in a contract until the janitor's 6-year-old daughter reveals a truth that leaves him paralyzed. Before we unfold this sorrowful story of isolation and grief, comment your location and subscribe for more emotional journeys. The mahogany doors of Hartwell Industries' boardroom burst open with such force they slammed against the marble walls, creating a thunderous echo that reverberated through Manhattan's most exclusive business tower. Richard Hartwell, 42, felt his stomach plummet as he watched his lead Arabic translator, Hassan al-Mahmoud, storm toward the conference table where 12 Saudi investors sat rigid with confusion and growing irritation. I refuse to work under these conditions anymore. Hassan's voice boomed through the room as he slammed his leather portfolio onto the polished surface with enough force to make the crystal water glasses jump. Find yourself another translator, Mr. Hartwell. I'm done with your impossible demands, your constant second-guessing, and your complete lack of respect for my professional expertise. And Richard's jaw clenched so hard he could hear his teeth grinding as he watched 3 years of delicate negotiations crumble before his eyes like sand through his fingers. The Al-Rashid Group representatives exchanged worried glances, their traditional white thobes a stark contrast against the modern glass and steel of Manhattan's skyline stretching endlessly behind them. This wasn't just any business deal. This was the renewable energy contract that would either save his crumbling empire or destroy everything he'd painstakingly built since his devastating divorce 5 years ago. The divorce had cost him half his assets, his beloved Connecticut mansion, and worst of all, the respect of his teenage son Marcus, who'd chosen to live with his mother in California. Since then, Richard had thrown himself into work with the desperate intensity of a drowning man, alienating employees and partners alike with his obsessive need to control every detail. "Hassan, please reconsider." Richard's voice remained controlled despite his racing heart and the cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. "We're 48 hours away from signing the largest renewable energy contract in Middle Eastern history. $9 billion depends on this translation. Think about what this means, not just for my company, but for sustainable energy development across 6 countries. But Hassan was already at the door, his weathered face set with the determination of a man who'd finally reached his breaking point. You should have thought about that before questioning every single word I spoke, demanding I repeat myself 3 times for every technical term, and treating me like an incompetent amateur instead of someone with 30 years of experience in international negotiations. The door slammed shut with a finality that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence that pressed down on everyone present like a heavy blanket. Richard could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as the full weight of catastrophe settled on his shoulders. The eldest Saudi investor, Abdullah al-Rashid, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver threading through his carefully groomed beard, spoke rapidly in Arabic to his colleagues. Richard watched helplessly as their expressions grew increasingly concerned, their voices rising with what sounded unmistakably like frustration and disappointment. Without Hassan, he was completely cut off from the most important business negotiation of his life, reduced to a silent observer in his own boardroom. Richard's assistant, Jennifer Morrison, appeared at his side with panic clearly written across her usually composed features. Her normally perfect blonde hair was disheveled from running her fingers through it, and her voice trembled as she whispered urgently in his ear. "Sir, what do we do? The contract signing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I've already called every translation service in the city. They're either unavailable on such short notice or don't have anyone with the specific technical expertise needed for renewable energy contracts." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of the Hudson River, Richard could see the cleaning crew beginning their evening rounds on the floor below. Among them, he noticed Maria Gonzalez, the night janitor who'd worked quietly and efficiently in the building for 6 years. She moved with practiced precision between offices, her small frame dwarfed by the industrial cleaning cart, and trailing behind her was her young daughter, a tiny girl who couldn't be more than 6 years old, with wild, dark curls bouncing as she skipped alongside her mother's cart, completely oblivious to the corporate drama unfolding 42 floors above. "We're finished," Richard whispered hoarsely, running both hands through his graying hair until it stood at odd angles. The Al-Rashid group was already gathering their important documents, disappointment evident in every movement as they prepared to abandon 3 years of careful planning. 3 years of countless transatlantic flights to Riyadh, millions of dollars in development costs, environmental impact studies, and regulatory approvals, all about to vanish into thin air because of one man's wounded pride and Richard's own inability to trust the people he hired to help him succeed. 6-year-old Sofia Gonzalez pressed her small nose against the cool glass of the elevator as it climbed steadily toward the 42nd floor, watching the city lights blur past like falling stars. Her mother, Maria, adjusted her cleaning supplies with the weary efficiency of someone who'd perfected the same routine for countless nights, sighing deeply as she mentally prepared for another long evening shift. It had been another exhausting day that started at 5 a.m. at the luxury hotel downtown, where Maria worked as a housekeeper, cleaning rooms and changing linens for wealthy guests who left tips smaller than what they spent on a single cup of coffee. The double shift was necessary. The hotel job paid the rent on their tiny studio apartment in Queens, while the evening cleaning position at Hartwell Industries covered groceries, Sophia's school supplies, and the ever-growing pile of medical bills left over from Ahmed's cancer treatment. "Mija, remember what I told you about staying quiet while Mommy works?" Maria said softly in Spanish, her voice carrying the accumulated fatigue of someone juggling 2 demanding jobs while raising a child alone. Then, almost without thinking, she switched to Arabic, the language her late husband Ahmed had taught her during their brief but passionate marriage in Morocco 7 years ago, back when the world had seemed full of possibility instead of endless struggle. Sophia nodded solemnly, understanding every word in both languages with the natural ease that only children possess. Her father had been gone for 2 years now, taken by the aggressive cancer that had ravaged his body, despite the treatments that had drained their savings. But his gift of language lived on in his daughter's quick mind and eager heart. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime to reveal chaos in the executive wing of Hartwell Industries. Sophia's dark eyes widened as she took in the scene. Men in pristine white robes gesturing frantically with obvious distress, while a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit paced back and forth like a caged animal, his face flushed red with what looked like a mixture of anger and desperation. The voices mixed together in a cacophony of languages, rapid Arabic, frustrated English, and something that sounded like barely controlled panic in every tongue. Sophia had heard these tones before in the hospital waiting rooms, where she'd spent so many hours during her father's illness, the sound adults made when something very important was going terribly wrong. Maria quickly pushed her cart toward the far end of the hallway, her head down and shoulders hunched as she tried to avoid the commotion. She'd learned over 6 years of night shift work that the best way to keep her job was to remain invisible, to clean efficiently around whatever dramas the wealthy executives brought to their glass towers. But Sophia's naturally curious nature, inherited from her father who had loved to solve puzzles and mysteries, got the better of her careful upbringing. She'd heard that angry voice before. It belonged to the tall man who sometimes yelled at her mother when the offices weren't cleaned to his exacting standards. The same voice that had once made her mother cry quietly in the supply closet while Sophia pretended to be asleep in the corner. "They're saying they want to leave because no one can talk to them properly," Sophia whispered to her mother in Arabic, having easily followed the Saudi men's increasingly frustrated conversation. Her small voice was filled with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd grown up switching between languages as naturally as breathing. Maria's tired eyes widened in genuine surprise as she realized the full extent of her daughter's linguistic abilities. Even after 6 years of marriage to Ahmed, her own grasp of Arabic had remained limited to basic household conversations, simple expressions of love, and the prayers Ahmed had taught her. But Sophia had absorbed her father's native language like a tiny sponge, soaking up not just words, but the cultural nuances and formal business terminology that Ahmed had used in his work for an international import company in Casablanca. Through the glass doors of the boardroom, they could see Richard Hartwell sitting with his head buried in his hands, like a man watching his world collapse, while the Saudi investors continued their heated discussion with increasing urgency. His assistant was frantically making phone call after phone call, desperation evident in every gesture, as she tried to locate a qualified translator willing to work on such impossibly short notice. Sophia tugged gently at her mother's worn uniform sleeve, her expression serious beyond her years. "Mama, the nice man looks very sad, like you did when the hospital people said Papa couldn't come home anymore. The men in white clothes are saying they have to go back to their country tomorrow because no one here can help them understand the important papers about building things that make electricity from the sun and wind." 03. Richard's phone had been ringing non-stop for 45 minutes, each call ending with the same devastating result. Every translation service in New York City was either booked solid for the next 2 weeks, couldn't provide someone with the specific technical expertise needed for complex renewable energy contracts, or was demanding fees so astronomical that even Richard's desperate situation couldn't justify the expense. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled through his contacts, calling in favors from business associates, university professors, even the cultural attaché at the United Nations. Nothing. It was as if the entire Arabic-speaking population of Manhattan had simultaneously vanished into thin air, leaving him stranded on the precipice of financial ruin. "Mr. Hartwell?" Abdullah al-Rashid spoke in heavily accented English, his dignified voice carrying the weight of disappointment and cultural frustration. "We have great respect for your company and your vision for sustainable energy development in our region. But without proper, accurate communication, we cannot proceed with confidence. Our board of directors in Riyadh expects detailed understanding of every clause, every technical specification, every legal implication of this partnership." Richard nodded grimly, feeling the familiar knot of panic tightening in his chest as he watched 3. $9 billion and his company's salvation, slowly slipping away like water through his fingers. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built his entire fortune by obsessing over details, by demanding perfection from every employee and contractor, yet his own overbearing attitude and lack of trust had driven away the one person who could save everything he'd worked for. The Saudi delegation had been remarkably patient, far more gracious than he deserved considering the circumstances. They'd flown halfway around the world specifically for this signing, had cleared their schedules and prepared their own technical teams for implementation. Now they were preparing to return to Riyadh empty-handed, taking with them not just the contract, but the reputation damage that would follow Richard's company throughout the Middle Eastern business community. Outside the boardroom, Sophia watched the adult chaos unfold with the peculiar clarity that children often bring to complicated situations. She observed her mother methodically emptying wastebaskets and wiping down surfaces with mechanical precision, but Sophia could easily see the worry lines creasing Maria's forehead, the way her shoulders remained tense, even during routine tasks. They needed this job desperately, especially with Sophia starting first grade next month and all the associated expenses that would bring: new clothes, school supplies, the after-school program that would allow Maria to keep both her jobs. The studio apartment rent had already increased twice this year, and the medical bills from Ahmed's treatment continued arriving sporadically, like painful reminders of everything they'd lost. "Mama," Sophia whispered urgently, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "What if I could help the sad man and the men in white clothes talk to each other properly? I understand everything they're saying, and I know all the words Papa taught me about business and building things." Maria nearly dropped the heavy trash bag she was holding, her face immediately flushing with a mixture of pride and terror. "Mija, what are you saying? These are very important business people discussing things worth more money than we could ever imagine. Children don't belong in their meetings, especially not little girls whose mothers clean their offices." But Sophia had already made up her mind with the decisive determination that had characterized her personality since she was old enough to walk. She'd been watching her mother clean these pristine offices for 2 years now, ever since the daycare center had started allowing children to accompany parents on evening shifts as a cost-saving measure for struggling families. She'd seen how hard her mother worked, scrubbing and polishing until her hands were raw, how tired she looked after splitting 16-hour days between 2 physically demanding jobs. Sophia had also noticed how the important men in expensive suits barely acknowledged her mother's existence, treating her like part of the furniture rather than a human being deserving of basic courtesy and respect. "The men in white clothes are saying the contract is very good and fair, but they need someone to explain the difficult words about solar panels and wind machines and how the American laws work differently from their country's laws," Sophia said with quiet confidence, her dark eyes bright with intelligence. "Papa Ahmed taught me all about business words when he worked at the import company in Morocco. Remember? He used to practice his presentations with me and said I was the smartest little translator he'd ever met." 4. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Richard Hartwell's world shifted on its axis in a way that would forever divide his life into before and after. He was staring at his phone screen, mentally calculating the catastrophic financial implications of this failed deal. The layoffs he'd have to authorize, the expansion projects that would be cancelled, the investors who would abandon ship, when a small, clear voice cut through his spiral of despair like a beam of sunlight through storm clouds. "Excuse me, sir. I think I can help you talk to those men who are upset." Richard looked up from his phone to see quite possibly the most unexpected sight in the history of Hartwell Industries boardroom meetings. Sofia Gonzalez stood barely 3 feet tall in the doorway, her wild, dark curls framing a face so serious and determined it seemed almost incongruous with her bright pink Frozen-themed t-shirt, denim overalls, and light-up sneakers that blinked with each step. Behind her, Maria hovered in the hallway like a deer caught in headlights, clearly mortified by her daughter's unprecedented boldness. Her cleaning cart remained abandoned by the elevator as she wrung her hands nervously, torn between grabbing Sophia and running away, and the growing realization that her 6-year-old daughter had just interrupted a meeting involving more money than their family would see in several lifetimes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hartwell," Maria began in heavily accented English, her voice shaking with embarrassment as she reached desperately for Sophia's small hand. "She didn't mean to interrupt your very important meeting with these distinguished gentlemen. Come quickly, Mija. We need to finish our work and go home before we cause any more trouble." But Sophia stood her ground with the unwavering confidence of someone who'd inherited her father's diplomatic instincts and her mother's stubborn determination. She looked directly at Richard with those impossibly mature brown eyes and spoke with a clarity that cut straight to the heart of his problem. "The men in white clothes aren't really angry at you, Mr. Hartwell. They're frustrated and worried because they think you don't trust them enough to have honest conversations." The man with the beard who was translating before, he left because he was tired of you asking him to explain the same things over and over, like you thought he was lying or making mistakes on purpose. Died. The boardroom fell into absolute silence, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone present realizes they're witnessing something extraordinary. Even the Saudi investors stopped their urgent discussions to stare at this unexpected interruption, their expressions shifting from confusion to curiosity as they processed what had just happened. Richard felt a complicated mix of emotions washing over him: irritation at the interruption, embarrassment at being lectured by a child, and underneath it all, a growing sense of wonder at how this tiny person had managed to cut through hours of confusion and identify the exact problem that had been eating away at his business relationships for years. "Sweetheart," Richard said, forcing his voice to remain patient despite the chaos swirling around him. "This is a very complicated business meeting about things that adults spend many years in school learning to understand. These men and I are discussing technical specifications for solar energy systems, international law, and financial contracts worth billions of dollars. Why don't you go help your mother finish her work so you can get home to bed?" Sophia's expression didn't waver for even a second. Instead, she turned toward Abdullah al-Rashid with the poise of a seasoned diplomat and spoke in fluid, perfect Arabic that flowed like music through the tense boardroom air. "Respected sir, please don't leave yet because of this confusion. This man has worked very hard for 3 years to create something beautiful and important for your country, something that will bring clean energy to help children and families have better lives. He's not trying to be disrespectful. He's just scared of making mistakes because this project means everything to him. Just like taking care of my mother means everything to me." The reaction was immediate and absolutely dramatic. Abdullah's distinguished eyebrows shot up in amazement, and he leaned forward in his chair, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The other Saudi investors began murmuring among themselves in rapid Arabic, their voices filled with wonder and growing interest. Abdullah responded to Sophia in Arabic, his tone gentle, but clearly testing her language abilities with increasingly complex vocabulary and cultural references. Sophia listened with the intense concentration of someone who understood that this moment would change everything, then replied with confidence that made every adult in the room question their assumptions about what children were capable of understanding. "He says they've been very impressed with your company's solar panel designs and the environmental impact studies you provided," Sophia translated, looking back at Richard with those serious brown eyes. "But they need someone who can explain how the maintenance contracts will work under American law versus Saudi Arabian law, and how the training programs for their workers will be structured. They're not trying to be difficult or demanding. They just want to make sure their people back home understand everything perfectly so no one gets confused or makes mistakes later." "05. My God," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. "Who taught you to speak Arabic with such incredible fluency and precision? That wasn't just conversational Arabic. You were using formal business terminology that most native speakers would struggle with. Sophia seemed to consider her answer carefully, her small face growing thoughtful in a way that reminded everyone present that despite her remarkable abilities, she was still a 6-year-old child processing questions about her deceased father. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of pride and sadness that tugged at every heart in the room. "My papa, Ahmed Rashid, taught me everything," she replied with simple dignity that would have impressed the most sophisticated diplomats. "He came from Casablanca in Morocco and married my mama 7 years ago when she was working at a hotel there during her vacation. He said Arabic was the most beautiful language in the entire world, like music that could paint pictures with words, and that I should learn it perfectly so I could talk to his family and understand the poetry and stories that made his culture so special." Her voice grew softer, and Maria had to fight back tears as she watched her daughter's small shoulders straighten with the kind of pride that comes from carrying on someone's legacy. "But Papa got very sick with cancer and went to heaven when I was 4 years old. The doctors tried everything they could, but sometimes even the smartest grown-ups can't fix what's broken." Maria's eyes filled with tears as she remembered those final months when Ahmed, weak from chemotherapy but determined to leave his daughter with gifts that couldn't be taken away, had spent every moment of his remaining strength teaching Sophia not just the language but the cultural nuances, business terminology, and diplomatic grace that had made him successful in international trade. Abdullah al-Rashid leaned forward with an expression that had transformed completely from skepticism to genuine wonder and growing respect. He began speaking directly to Sophia in rapid, formal Arabic, the kind used in high-level business negotiations, testing her knowledge of technical terms, cultural protocols, and complex grammatical structures that would challenge even experienced translators. Sophia responded without hesitation, her small voice carrying the confidence and cultural awareness that her father had spent countless hours instilling in her. The exchange continued for several minutes, while Richard, Maria, and the other investors watched in amazement, witnessing a level of cross-cultural communication that most international businesses would pay thousands of dollars to achieve. "Mr. Al-Rashid says I remind him of his own granddaughter back in Riyadh, who is also 7 years old and loves to learn new languages," Sophia translated when the conversation paused. "But he says she's not nearly as good with business words as I am. He wants to know if you're really truly serious about the solar panel project for helping their cities become cleaner and better for children to grow up in, or if this is just about making money for yourself." Richard felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a recognition that this tiny girl had just asked the most important question of his entire career, the question that cut through all the legal documents and financial projections to the heart of what really mattered. The boardroom remained silent as everyone waited for his response. "Tell him," Richard said slowly, kneeling down so he could look directly into Sophia's eyes at her level, "that this project means more to me than just making money. It means the chance to help create clean energy that will make the air cleaner and the world better for children like you, not just in America but all over the world. Tell him that after my own son stopped talking to me because I was always too busy with work to be a real father, I realized that the most important business we can do is building a world that children will be proud to inherit." Sophia studied his face with the intensity of someone far beyond her years, seeming to weigh not just his words, but the sincerity behind them. Her dark eyes searched his expression for any sign of deception or manipulation, using instincts her father had taught her about reading people's true intentions. Then she turned back to Abdullah and spoke in Arabic with a passion and conviction that surprised everyone in the room, her small hands gesturing expressively as she conveyed not just Richard's words, but somehow managed to translate the emotion and genuine commitment behind them. Whatever she said caused Abdullah to smile for the first time since entering the boardroom, his weathered face lighting up with an expression of satisfaction and growing trust. The next 4 hours transformed Richard Hartwell's understanding of both international business and the profound wisdom that children could bring to adult problems. Sophia had been provided with a stack of law books to boost her height at the conference table, and she translated with the precision of a seasoned professional, while occasionally asking for clarification on technical terms that would challenge most college graduates. Her questions revealed an intuitive understanding of both American business culture and Saudi Arabian social customs that impressed even Abdullah's most experienced advisors. When Richard explained the 20-year warranty structure for the solar panels, Sophia didn't just translate the words. She asked why the warranty was structured that way, and then explained to the Saudi delegation the reasoning behind American business practices in terms they could easily relate to their own commercial experiences. They want to know about the maintenance training program for their engineers, Sophia explained, her small hands folded professionally as she spoke. Mr. Al-Rashid is concerned because the desert sand in their region might cause different problems than the equipment faces in other countries, and he wants to make sure their people will know how to handle those special challenges. Richard found himself explaining complex technical details to a 6-year-old girl who then conveyed them to billionaire investors with perfect accuracy. But more remarkably, Sophia began offering suggestions that showed an understanding of human nature that most adults never developed. Why don't you tell them that you'll send American engineers to Saudi Arabia to train their people for free for the first 2 years, she suggested during a brief break, looking up at Richard with those serious dark eyes. And maybe their engineers could come to America too, so both countries learn from each other. Papa Ahmed always said, the best business happens when everybody teaches everybody else something new. The suggestion was brilliant in its simplicity, addressing the Saudi concerns about technical support while creating the kind of cultural exchange that would strengthen the business relationship for decades. Abdullah's face lit up when Sophia presented the idea, and he immediately began discussing implementation details with his colleagues. As the evening stretched toward midnight, the framework for the largest renewable energy deal in Middle Eastern history took shape around Sophia's patient translation work. Contract terms were refined, technical specifications were clarified, and cultural concerns were addressed with a sensitivity that had been completely missing from previous negotiations. By 11:45 p.m., when Maria had finished cleaning every office on the 42nd floor twice over, the Saudi delegation was preparing to leave with smiles of satisfaction and handshakes that promised a successful signing ceremony the following morning. Abdullah al-Rashid spoke privately with Sophia in Arabic for several minutes, then asked her to translate his final words to Richard. Her small face grew serious as she listened, nodding with the gravity of someone entrusted with an important message. He says tomorrow they will definitely sign the contract because tonight they finally understood that you're not just a businessman. You're a father who wants to build something good for children everywhere, Sophia translated, yawning as exhaustion finally began to show despite her determined efforts to stay alert. But first, before the signing ceremony, he wants to meet with you alone, to discuss something very important about families and what really matters when people do business together. As Maria gathered her cleaning supplies with hands that trembled slightly from fatigue and amazement at what her daughter had accomplished, Richard watched Sophia lean against her mother's side. For the first time in hours, she looked like the tired 6-year-old she actually was, rather than the miraculous translator who'd saved his entire empire from collapse. Mrs. Gonzalez, Richard said quietly, his voice hoarse with emotion and gratitude. I don't have words to express what Sophia did tonight. She didn't just save a business deal. She showed me something I'd completely forgotten about what really matters in life and business. She has a gift that most adults spend decades trying to develop, if they ever manage it at all. Maria nodded graciously, her tired eyes bright with pride for her extraordinary daughter, but Richard could see the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders after a day that had started before dawn and stretched far beyond any reasonable working hours. "Sophia," Richard called softly as they reached the elevator, his heart full of emotions he couldn't quite name. "What you did tonight was absolutely extraordinary, beyond anything I've ever witnessed in 30 years of international business. You have a remarkable gift for bringing people together and helping them understand each other." Sophia looked back at him with those serious brown eyes that had somehow seen through to the heart of a $3.9 billion negotiation and found the human connection that made everything else possible. "Don't worry, Mr. Hartwell," she said with the quiet confidence of someone far beyond her years. "Everything will be okay now. Papa Ahmed used to tell me that when people tell the truth to each other with kind hearts, good things always happen, like magic, but real." The next morning arrived with the crisp promise of September in Manhattan, but Richard Hartwell barely noticed the golden sunlight streaming through his penthouse windows. He'd been awake since 4 a.m., pacing his empty apartment and replaying every moment of the previous evening, unable to shake the image of Sophia's serious brown eyes and the way she'd effortlessly bridged two worlds with nothing but honesty and courage. At exactly 8 a.m., his doorman called to announce Abdullah al-Rashid's early arrival. The Saudi businessman entered Richard's office, wearing traditional dress, but carrying himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to billion-dollar negotiations. However, instead of discussing contract details, Abdullah's first words caught Richard completely off guard. "Mr. Hartwell, before we proceed with the signing ceremony, I must share something that your remarkable young translator revealed to me last night," Abdullah said, settling into the leather chair across from Richard's desk. "She spoke about her father, Ahmed Rashid, with such love and precision that I felt compelled to research his background." Richard leaned forward, sensing the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance." "Ahmed Rashid was my nephew," Abdullah interrupted quietly. "My sister Fatima's youngest son. He moved to Morocco for university, married your cleaning lady, and we lost touch when he became ill. Last night, I watched my grandniece save your company without knowing we were family." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. Sophia wasn't just a gifted child who'd happened to overhear their crisis. She was Abdullah's great-niece, the granddaughter of one of the most respected families in Saudi Arabia's business community. The cosmic irony was staggering. The solution to his most desperate crisis had been cleaning his offices every night for 2 years. "She doesn't know, does she?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse with shock. Maria never learned Ahmed's full family background. He was protecting them from obligations he felt they couldn't fulfill, Abdullah explained. "But Sophia carries royal blood, Mr. Hartwell. In our culture, she would be entitled to education, support, opportunities beyond anything her current circumstances provide." Richard's mind raced as the implications crystallized. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that while we sign this contract as business partners, I've discovered I have family responsibilities that extend far beyond renewable energy projects," Abdullah replied with quiet determination. "That little girl deserves more than watching her mother scrub floors to survive." The contract signing ceremony proceeded flawlessly at 10 a.m., with photographers documenting the historic moment when Hartwell Industries secured the largest renewable energy deal in Middle Eastern history. But Richard's attention kept drifting to the cleaning crew. He could see working on lower floors, wondering how he would explain to a 6-year-old that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. As Abdullah prepared to leave for the airport, he handed Richard an envelope sealed with red wax. "This contains information about Sophia's inheritance and educational trust fund that Ahmed's father established before his death. It's been waiting for the right moment to be claimed." "How much are we talking about?" Richard asked, though he suspected the answer would be substantial. Enough to ensure Sophia receives the finest education available anywhere in the world, and that Maria never has to work 2 jobs again. Abdullah smiled. Ahmed's father was one of our most successful oil ministers. His granddaughter will want for nothing. That evening, Richard found himself in the most unusual position of his career, waiting nervously outside a Queens tenement building, holding a manila envelope that contained information capable of transforming 2 lives forever. The contrast between his usual boardroom negotiations and this cramped hallway smelling of cooking spices and old carpet was jarring, yet somehow more real than any business meeting he'd ever attended. When Maria opened the door to their studio apartment, her exhaustion was immediately visible. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands showed the rough calluses of someone who'd spent another 16-hour day cleaning and scrubbing. Behind her, Sophia sat at a tiny kitchen table, carefully working through first-grade homework with the same serious concentration she'd brought to billion-dollar translations. Mr. Hartwell. Maria's voice carried surprise and concern. Is everything all right? Did something happen with the contract? The contract is fine, Mrs. Gonzalez. Better than fine, actually. But I need to speak with you and Sophia about something extraordinary that's happened. Richard's usual confidence faltered as he struggled to find words for a conversation he'd never imagined having. Sophia looked up from her coloring book, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. Did the men in white clothes change their minds about building the sun machines? No, sweetheart, they're very happy about that. But it turns out that one of those men, Mr. Al-Rashid, knew your Papa Ahmed much better than anyone realized. Richard knelt down to Sophia's eye level, his voice gentle but serious. Sophia, how much did your Papa tell you about his family back in Morocco and Saudi Arabia? Maria stiffened, ancient worries suddenly surfacing. Ahmed said his family was traditional, that they might not approve of him marrying someone like me. He said it was better if we made our own way without asking them for help we might not receive. He was protecting you both, Richard said carefully, but perhaps in ways that weren't necessary. Sophia, your papa's uncle is Abdullah Al-Rashid, the man you helped me talk to yesterday. You saved a business deal between your own family and mine without knowing it. The silence that followed was profound. Sophia's crayon stopped moving across the paper as she processed this information with the gravity of someone far beyond her 6 years. Maria's face went pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter protectively. What does this mean? Maria whispered. Richard opened the envelope Abdullah had given him, spreading documents across their tiny table. It means Sophia has a trust fund that her grandfather established before he died. It means she's entitled to the finest education money can provide. It means you'll never have to work 2 jobs again, Maria. Sophia studied the papers with the same intensity she'd brought to the Arabic translations, though most of the legal terminology was beyond even her remarkable vocabulary. Does this mean we have to move away from here? Will I still see you sometimes, Mr. Hartwell? The question caught Richard off guard, revealing something he hadn't fully acknowledged to himself. In less than 24 hours, this extraordinary child had become more important to him than any business deal, more precious than any profit margin. That depends on what you and your mother decide, he said honestly. But I was hoping we might see a lot more of each other, regardless of where you live. Maria's protective instincts warred with the overwhelming relief of financial security. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to us? Richard looked at Sophia, then back at Maria, searching for words to explain feelings he was only beginning to understand himself. Because in one evening, your daughter showed me something I'd forgotten. That the most important things in life aren't contracts or money. They're connections between people who care about each other. A day 3 weeks later, Richard stood in the most exclusive private school in Manhattan, watching Sophia confidently introduce herself to classmates whose parents owned international corporations and government positions. She wore a crisp navy uniform that transformed her from the cleaning lady's daughter into someone who belonged among New York's educational elite. Yet her warm smile and genuine curiosity remained unchanged. The Pemberton Academy had initially been skeptical about accepting a mid-semester transfer student from public school, but Sophia's entrance examinations had shattered every assumption about her academic preparation. She tested at a 10th grade level in languages, 8th grade in mathematics, and displayed cultural awareness that impressed even their most experienced international faculty. "She's remarkable," Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the headmistress, told Richard as they observed Sophia seamlessly switching between English, Spanish, and Arabic while helping other children with their language assignments. "I've never seen a 6-year-old with such natural diplomatic instincts. She's already mediating playground disputes between children who don't share common languages." Richard smiled, feeling a pride that surprised him with its intensity. "She has that gift for bringing people together. I've seen her do it with adults in the most high-pressure situations imaginable." The transformation in Sophia's circumstances had been swift but carefully managed. Abdullah had arranged for the trust fund to be administered through Richard's company, ensuring that Maria maintained full custody while gaining access to resources that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. They'd moved to a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, close enough to Sophia's school for easy transportation, but far enough from Richard's world to maintain appropriate boundaries. Yet those boundaries were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Richard found himself looking forward to their weekly dinners with an anticipation that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with Sophia's infectious laughter and Maria's gradual trust in his genuine intentions. "Mr. Hartwell," Sophia called out, running toward him across the playground with her backpack bouncing against her small frame. "Guess what? Mrs. Patterson says I can help teach Arabic to the older students who are learning international business, just like I helped you and Uncle Abdullah." The casual way she'd started referring to Abdullah as Uncle revealed how naturally Sophia adapted to expanding family connections. Video calls with relatives in Riyadh had become weekly events, with Abdullah's own grandchildren competing to practice their English with their newly discovered American cousin. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Richard said, automatically reaching out to fix her slightly crooked uniform tie. The gesture felt natural now, paternal in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. Maria approached from the parent pickup area, her appearance as transformed as their circumstances. The constant exhaustion had faded from her features, replaced by a confidence that came from security and rest. She'd enrolled in evening college courses, pursuing the education that pregnancy and Ahmed's illness had interrupted years earlier. "How was your day, Mija?" Maria asked in Spanish, then switched to English for Richard's benefit. "Did you remember to thank Mrs. Patterson for the extra reading books?" "I thanked her in Arabic, Spanish, and English," Sophia announced proudly. "She said that was probably excessive, but I told her Papa Ahmed taught me that saying thank you in someone's favorite language makes the gratitude more powerful." Richard watched the interaction with growing awareness of how completely these two had changed his understanding of what mattered in life. His penthouse apartment, once a symbol of success, now felt empty and cold compared to the warmth of shared meals and Sophia's excited stories about her school day. The Saudi contract had proceeded flawlessly, with implementation beginning ahead of schedule and under budget. Business magazines were calling it the deal of the decade, crediting Richard's negotiation skills and cultural sensitivity. Only a few people knew that the real credit belonged to a 6-year-old girl who'd seen past language barriers to the human hearts underneath. The crisis that would test everything they'd built together arrived on a grey October morning when Richard least expected it. His ex-wife, Catherine, called from California with news that made his blood run cold. Their 17-year-old son, Marcus, had been arrested for drunk driving and was facing serious charges that could derail his college plans and future prospects. "You need to come to Los Angeles immediately." Catherine's voice carried the same cold efficiency that had characterized their marriage's final years. "Marcus is asking for you. which frankly surprises me considering how you've prioritized work over family for the past 5 years. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be devastating. Richard had indeed thrown himself into business after the divorce, using work as an escape from the guilt of failing as a husband and father. Now his son needed him, but accepting Catherine's summons would mean abandoning Sophia and Maria when their relationship was still fragile and new. "I'll be there tomorrow," Richard promised, already calculating flight schedules and rearranging meetings. But as he hung up, a deeper worry surfaced. Would Sophia understand why he had to leave suddenly? Would she interpret his absence as another adult abandoning her, like the death that had taken her father? That evening's dinner at their usual restaurant carried an uncomfortable tension as Richard struggled to explain the situation without revealing his own fears about damaged relationships and competing loyalties. "Your son needs you," Maria said simply when he finished explaining. "Family always comes first, Mr. Hartwell. Sophia and I understand this." But Sophia's reaction was more complex. Her dark eyes studied his face with the intensity she usually reserved for important translations, as if trying to decode emotions he was struggling to hide. "Are you worried that if you go help your son, you won't want to come back and see us anymore?" she asked with devastating directness. The question exposed exactly what Richard hadn't been able to articulate. His relationship with Sophia and Maria felt precious but fragile, built on circumstances so extraordinary they seemed almost magical. Would the spell break if he returned to his old life of family crisis and corporate demands? "Sweetheart, I will always want to see you," Richard said, kneeling beside her chair. "But I'm scared that maybe I'm not very good at being the kind of person that people depend on. I wasn't a good enough father to Marcus, and I don't want to disappoint you the same way." Sophia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important problems. Then she reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it carefully on the table. "Papa Ahmed wrote this for me before he went to heaven," she said quietly. "Mama reads it to me when I'm scared about things changing. Maybe it will help you too." Richard unfolded the paper to find a short letter in Ahmed's careful handwriting, written in English so Maria could read it aloud. "My precious Sophia, if you are reading this, it means I had to go away before I wanted to. But love doesn't end just because people can't be in the same place anymore. The love I have for you and Mama will keep growing even when I'm not there to show it every day. When you meet other people who want to love you, don't be afraid to let them. Love isn't like money that gets used up. It's like sunshine that makes everything grow stronger. Be brave, my little translator. Help people understand each other, and let them help you too." Richard's vision blurred as he read Ahmed's words, recognizing the wisdom of a man who'd understood what really mattered even as his own life was ending. "Papa knew that sometimes people have to go away to help their families," Sophia said softly. "But he also knew that real love finds ways to stay connected even across big distances." The week Richard spent in Los Angeles dealing with Marcus's legal troubles became an unexpected journey of reconciliation and growth that transformed his understanding of fatherhood. His son, initially sullen and defensive, gradually opened up about feeling abandoned and forgotten during the years following the divorce. "You sent money, Dad, but you never sent yourself," Marcus said during one of their long conversations in the lawyer's waiting room. "I know you were building your business empire, but I needed my father, not financial support." The words were painful but necessary, forcing Richard to confront the ways he'd used work as an escape from the messy complications of human relationships. Yet this time, instead of retreating into professional obligations, he found himself thinking constantly about Sophia's wisdom and the letter from her father that had given him permission to believe in love that transcended physical presence. Daily video calls with Sophia became the bright spot in each difficult day. She would appear on his phone screen in her school uniform, chattering excitedly about her classes while carefully not asking when he was coming home, a sensitivity that revealed her own fears about abandonment despite her brave exterior. "How is your son feeling today?" she would ask with genuine concern, that amazed the adults around her. Is he scared about the judge meeting? When I was scared about starting big school, Mama told me that sometimes when we make mistakes, it's because we need to learn something important about being stronger. Richard shared these conversations with Marcus, who was initially skeptical about his father's relationship with a 6-year-old translator, but gradually became intrigued by Sophia's perspective on complex problems. She sounds pretty wise for a little kid, Marcus admitted after hearing about Sophia's advice regarding responsibility and consequences. Maybe I could meet her sometime, if she wouldn't mind having a messed-up older brother figure. The breakthrough came when Marcus's case was resolved with community service and counseling rather than jail time, thanks partly to character letters that Richard had solicited from Abdullah al-Rashid and other business partners who could testify to his commitment to family responsibilities. But the real victory was personal. Marcus asked if he could come to New York for Thanksgiving, specifically requesting to meet Sophia and Maria. I want to understand what changed you, Dad, he said simply. You sound different when you talk about them, like you finally figured out what actually matters. The flight back to New York carried a lightness Richard hadn't felt in years. He'd learned to be present for family crisis without sacrificing the new relationships that had become central to his happiness. More importantly, he discovered that love really was like Sophia's father had written, not a limited resource, but a renewable energy that grew stronger when shared generously. Sophia was waiting in the airport arrival area, holding a hand-drawn sign that read, "Welcome home, Mr. Hartwell," in English, Spanish, and Arabic. When she ran into his arms, Richard felt the profound satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned the difference between success and fulfillment. "Did you fix things with your son?" she asked seriously, studying his face for signs of lingering worry. "We're working on it together," Richard replied honestly. "Just like you taught me, when people tell the truth to each other with kind hearts, good things happen." Sophia beamed with the satisfaction of someone whose advice had been proven wise. Papa Ahmed would be proud that his words helped another papa learn how to love better. That evening, as they shared dinner and stories about the week they'd spent apart, Richard realized that his greatest fear, that distance would diminish their connection, had been unfounded. Instead, their relationship had grown stronger through the test of separation and reunion, proving that some bonds transcend geography and circumstance. Christmas morning in Richard's penthouse apartment bore no resemblance to the sterile holiday celebrations of his previous life. The space had been transformed into a warm gathering place where 3 generations and multiple cultures blended seamlessly around a magnificent tree that Sophia had insisted on decorating with ornaments representing everyone's heritage. Marcus had arrived from California 3 days earlier, his initial nervousness about meeting Sophia quickly dissolving into genuine affection for the little sister he'd never expected to have. He'd been amazed by her ability to switch effortlessly between languages while helping him understand the cultural significance of various decorations that Abdullah had sent from Saudi Arabia. "She's like a tiny United Nations diplomat," Marcus told Richard, as they watched Sophia patiently teaching Maria's elderly mother how to say Merry Christmas in Arabic. "I can't believe a 6-year-old helped you land the biggest deal in your company's history." The morning brought gifts that reflected their expanding family's understanding of what truly mattered. Richard had arranged for a surprise video call with Ahmed's extended family in Morocco, allowing Sophia to practice her Arabic with cousins she'd never met while receiving their blessings for her new life in America. But the most meaningful moment came when Sophia presented Richard with a hand-drawn picture that depicted their first meeting in the boardroom, complete with Arabic text bubbles and a crayon rendering of the moment that had changed everything. "I wanted to remember exactly how we found each other," she explained seriously. "Papa Ahmed always said that the most important stories should be written down so future children can learn from them. Abdullah had flown in from Riyadh specifically for this celebration. bringing news that the renewable energy project was exceeding all expectations and generating interest from governments across the Middle East and North Africa. But more importantly, he'd brought Sophia's formal adoption papers that would make her legally his ward, while allowing her to remain with Maria in New York. "You are now officially my granddaughter," Abdullah told Sophia during the gift opening ceremony. "But more than that, you are the bridge between our family's past and its future. Your father would be overwhelmed with pride to see how you've honored his memory by bringing people together." The afternoon brought the arrival of Catherine, Richard's ex-wife, who had surprised everyone by accepting his invitation to meet the people who'd become so central to his transformed life. Her initial skepticism melted away as she watched Richard interact with Sophia with a patience and warmth she'd never seen during their marriage. "You've learned something I never could teach you," Catherine told him quietly as they watched Sophia and Marcus collaborate on a puzzle while chattering in rapid Spanish. How to be present for people instead of always planning the next move. As evening approached and their guests prepared to leave, Sophia made an announcement that surprised everyone. She wanted to give a speech in 3 languages to thank everyone for making their new family possible. Standing on a chair to address the room properly, she spoke first in English, then Spanish, then Arabic, her small voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd learned that language was a bridge rather than a barrier between hearts that wanted to connect. "Papa Ahmed taught me that families aren't just the people we're born with," she concluded, looking directly at Richard with those serious brown eyes that had first seen through his desperation to the person he could become. "Sometimes families are the people who find each other when they most need love and help each other become the best versions of themselves." Richard felt tears on his cheeks as he realized that his search for business success had led him to something infinitely more valuable. A little girl whose wisdom had taught him that the greatest deals weren't measured in dollars, but in the connections that made life worth living. "Thank you, Sophia," he said, lifting her into his arms, "for teaching me that the most important translation isn't between languages, it's between lonely hearts that want to become a family." As snow began falling outside the panoramic windows, Richard looked around at the faces of people who'd become his chosen family and realized that some miracles came disguised as ordinary children with extraordinary gifts for bringing